Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you. It's a great honor to stand in front of such a bunch of well-known experts. So here I go. My story will be about this region that might be not known to some of you, being Flanders, the northern part of Belgium, and Dutch-speaking, about 6 million inhabitants. For the Italians, it's about the same size as Trentino Alto Adige. So let's start off just by stressing again some necessity. I have the feeling that it was not yet stressed enough. So what I'm going to provide you with, just for a few moments, is some horror images. So there we go. This isn't... Okay, yeah. Okay, this is horror image number 1, audio cassette, completely flaked. This is a warped film. This is even worse, vinegar thread film, also a lot of warp on it. This is a completely broken wax cylinder. This is an audio tape. Actually, it is from the IPEM archive, I have to say. I'm sorry to mention that, Mark, but on this tape you see a lot of residue of bad splices used by the original composer, who didn't know what the glue was going to look like 40 to 50 years after. And this image would maybe seem like a little bit more peaceful, but nevertheless, make no mistake, this is a pretty endangered species. It's a Philips VCR system. There are not many well-functioning VCR systems anymore around the world. This was one of the first home video systems, well affordable. Another endangered species, an open-reel video player. This is a DAT player, might be well known to Matthias. This is a Sony 7040, not produced anymore since December 2005, with the expertise on DAT becoming rapidly extinct. And this is a Webster Chicago wire recording player, also becoming quite extinct. There are quite a bit of them still in the US, but in Europe they're more hard to find. So, what am I trying to say with these images? I would like to stress the necessity of taking action. This is a quote by Mike Casey, well known to some. I see Bill. Mike Casey is in charge of the Indiana University Audiovisual Archives. They're embarking on a huge digitization project as we speak. He said this at the 2013 ARSC conference: "You can count for yourself. It's 10 to 15 years since 2013. Another quote by a well-known world expert in audiovisual preservation is Richard Wright, 40 years of experience at the BBC Information and Archives, and still a well-appreciated consultant in audiovisual preservation. He says, "So that's it, gone for analog by 2023. That's 8 years from now." Now, whether you believe him or not, this is a slide I got from Chris Lachinak, also well known to some, I believe. Chris is a member of the board of the AMIA, the Association of Moving Image Archivists in the US. And Chris recently launched a calculation tool called the cost of inaction. In a recent survey, his consultancy company, AV Preserve, estimated that in the US only, there are 240 million undigitized preservation-worthy audio items in the US. Of these, 168 million are magnetic media. Now, I spoke about Indiana University. At Indiana University, the digitization is being done by a Belgian company called Memnon. Memnon Audio Services, Archiving Services, is the biggest digitization company in the world. And the supply of digitizing this kind of audio material is, and up until 2028, is estimated to be at 25 million. So that's what I mean when I say it's the urgency of things. So we need it fast. About the next factor the next constraint that I would like to stress is a little bit shorter, but this is a graph that I also for which I get the basic material also from AV Preserve. These are not just, this is not just a graph for really official referral. These are just 3 lines mentioning an average of 16% annual increase of costs of audiovisual digitization between now and 2023. That's an average that has been estimated by Chris Lechinek and his team recently, and that's also the amount they count with for their cost of inaction calculator. You can doubt about this, whether this applies, for example, to audio cassettes. But what I see in my, let's say, 7 to 8 years experience in leading audiovisual digitization programs is that it might well be the case. When we talk, for example, about VCR or open reel video, this is not unrealistic. So you see how prices are going rapidly up. And this is the Flemish Minister of Budget. Now, she's looking quite happy on this picture, but believe me, she is not. For the first time in more than 10 years, the Flemish government is heading for a deficit on its budget. And that's not so easy to stand for a right-wing government. So we need it cheap. And then I would like to know who recognizes this. Okay, there you are. Wonderful, Nadia. Have you been inside? Okay. This is a detail of the Scrovegni Chapel. The Scrovegni Chapel was, or parts of it were painted by Giotto, the first real Renaissance painter, in 1305, beginning of the 14th century. And why am I mentioning this here? Because it's our heritage. Only Nadia managed to get in. That's very restricted time slots and very restricted numbers of people that can get in. You have to book a ticket far in advance, etc., etc. Now, what if also in our age we are creating this kind of masterpieces? And should we handle audiovisual carriers also like this, with very limited time slots and very careful handling? Let's just think about it. I'm not saying that a bit of an audiovisual documentary, for example, is the same as the Scrovegni frescoes, but think about it this way. So it's our heritage. And when we're talking heritage, we say we need it good. So I mentioned we need it fast, we need it cheap, and we need it good. So what does our solution look like? These are the 3 classical constraints, aren't they? So good and cheap won't be fast, and fast and good won't be cheap, cheap and fast won't be good. So then in Flanders there is one complicating extra problem, I would say, and maybe it's not so exceptional. I spoke to the lady of the Emilia-Romagna region, and she's got the same issue. Namely, there are audiovisual collections in libraries in Flanders, in archives, in some museums, in universities. There are the broadcasters, of course, with a very large one there. That's the public broadcaster where I used to work. There are privately held companies who have their own very worthwhile audiovisual collection. There are some private collections of private people. There are research centers, arts organizations, and governmental bodies. So there is a lot of audiovisual heritage also in Flanders. Now, what does the solution that we figured out look like? I must warn you, this is a slide. This is just the purpose of this is just a timeline. It didn't come overnight. It took us quite a while before we managed to convince the political world and others to start off with our institution called VIA. But nevertheless, we made it, and on the 21st of December 2012, we got some very good news from the Flemish government. They gave us the mission to start off for 2 years, later prolongated with 1 extra year, and by that time, so that's about now, we had to build infrastructures and make our marks on any of the classical activities in audiovisual archiving. Maybe the first is not so classical as it seems to be, but it is in these days. The first being digitization, the second being sustainable storage and archiving, and the third one being giving access. So, what do our systems look like? You can see here on this slide, you can see basically three parts. The first one is, you see at the top left, you see the CP, that's how we abbreviate content provider. Those are the institutions that bring their audiovisual heritage to digitization companies and for which we are responsible. One of them being, for example, the EPAM archive. They are registered in a tool called AMS. AMS stands for Archival Management System. It's just for registration, applying a barcode, managing digitization logistics workflows. And then there is the SP at the bottom here, stands for Service Provider. I heard Bill Storm this morning mentioning the opportunists who entered the field of audiovisual archiving at some point. And well, to a certain extent, you are right. There are some opportunists in the field, but we nevertheless decided to have all audiovisual heritage digitized via an outsourced way. I will come back to that later. Second block here in the middle is the ingest and the long-term preservation. We bought a MAM system. I don't know whether you are familiar with the abbreviation MAM. MAM stands for Media Asset Management. It's a tool with which you can manage as well the storage as the annotation, as the cataloging, as search and retrieval and all that kind of things at the back end of I would say, a digital repository. And the third block here on the right-hand side is the interaction part of VIA. Obviously, the purpose of the archive is to make it accessible, and we would like to make it accessible towards the needs of certain target groups. You see them pointed out here on the right-hand side. So there is education, for example. There is scientific research, and there is the general public via libraries. In between the MAM and these publics, there are interaction platforms of which the importance has been stressed and to which we pay a lot of attention. Now I will illustrate this briefly with a few keywords, with two examples actually, and in these examples you will hear coming back some keywords. Keywords are economies of scale, a special care for quality, internationally rooted technical expertise, a distributed content expertise, and customer satisfaction. These are the two examples that I selected, each of them from a very different nature. The first one being VRT's digital Betacam collection, and the second one, the University of Ghent's wax cylinder collection. And the quote here underneath is very important because I know it has come up and it will also later come up. Our approach is mass digitization if possible and a customized approach if necessary. Because it's not because of our searching for advantages of scale that we push everything through the same template, I would say. Let me spend a few words on VRT's digital Betacam collection, just to give you an illustration of the projects we do. The size is about 80,000. There's almost 50,000 hours of TV programs on it, and they were produced between 1998 and 2011. For these digital Betacam tapes, we embarked on a digitization project with more than 20 content providers. You see them here pointed out on our map. You see they're spread over Flanders. And you can also imagine, if you see this map, that there is a lot of logistics behind it. We carefully wrote a tender. The tendering process actually just the official term is about 4 months, but it takes another, let's say, 2 to 3 months to write such a tender, also because we work in utmost transparency towards our content providers, and we invite them to read and to give their comments on our tendering documents before we send them out. We selected a digitization company that has to stick to this tender, and that's where I would say that we try to avoid the opportunism. We stick very much to this kind of tenders, and the service providers are obviously bound to do what's written in there. I also mentioned quickly just MXF because that's one of the file formats that we work with. I can tell you a lot more about that, but please get in touch if you want to know more. As I said, there is a lot of logistics behind it. You see, it's the digital Betacam cassette. On the right-hand side is a screenshot of the EMS system. We developed a whole bunch of manuals as well for the content providers as for the service providers, how to deal with things, where to apply the barcodes, etc., just to make the logistic process go smoothly. Then we step over to the archiving process. This is what our infrastructure looks like. We've got two 17 petabytes storage infrastructures, which is quite big. It was one of the biggest storage infrastructures ever put in place in Flanders. We've got, it's completely redundant, so it's a one-on-one copy. They're connected with a 10 gigabit link. And there's even a third copy, not on this slide, but it's the LTOs are actually vaulted in a protected bunker in the Netherlands. This is what our ingest workflow looks like, and also there the aspect of quality control comes back to a large extent. Here you should think about processes like file integrity checks, virus checks, codec and wrapper compliancy checks. Also quality control is like the control for artifacts is something that we would like to develop soon more on, but that's obviously a complicated process. And this is our monitoring tool via which we provide, let's call it utmost transparency towards our content providers. At any point on the whole process, from the first sticking of a barcode until the latest reuse on any kind of platform, all content providers, because it's their content, can check what has happened with it during the digitization, during the ingest, and also during the access. This is just a quick goodie that we have when entering the office. You see this big screen, and every member of staff can follow all kinds of activities. And then let me spend a few words on interaction, as we call it. Some call it more access, or making things accessible. Then we're talking in the first place about schools. You know, teachers are demanding, at least in Flanders, they are demanding access to this kind of material. Especially here, it's VRT. We're talking about VRT material. And they're very keen to reuse this in the classroom. So we developed a platform called Testbeeld, testing image. It used to be a test name, but in the end we thought it was like a good name and we kept it. So it's particularly designed upon the needs of teachers. We did large survey with teachers, and we designed the platform completely to their demand. Just to mention one thing that came out of the survey, teachers don't want to search, they want to find. So it's not thousands and thousands of clips. It's well-picked clips that fit into their teaching programs. Obviously, there is a lot of work behind that, but that's the way we chose it. And it has quite a bit of success in the sense that only 1 year after that we launched this, and without making publicity for it, just mouth-by-mouth publicity, we managed to convince more than 1 out of 8 Flemish schools. This tool is being used already in 1 out of 8 Flemish schools, and we're aiming, let's say, on the longer run, our vision is to have this kind of tools every day in every classroom. Another example, as I said, is the University of Ghent's wax cylinder collection, completely different as the digital Betacams. Just 96 of them, and they represent at max 20 hours. Their content is ethno-linguistic field recordings from Belgian Congo featuring Bantu language samples, which is, from an ethno-linguistic point of view, very interesting. There was a famous professor who studied this, and they told me, the people at the African Studies Department in Ghent, they told me that this kind of material has been of use to Bantu linguistics researchers for quite a long time. So, there you see only 4 content providers in this whole project, of which one, of course, is the University of Ghent. Again, we worked with a tender, but here we had a lot of more of negotiation space and a completely different procedure just because it's a smaller project. And we've picked, only 2 weeks ago, we decided to have them digitized by one of the world's specialists, I think, in wax cylinder digitization, being Henri Chamou, the inventor of this emulated device called the Archeophone. Obviously, we stick here to standards like IASA TC04. And then, just to point you to the specificity of this project, it's not us that's saying, okay, you have to stick barcodes. Also, in this case, we want to see barcodes. No, on wax cylinders, even the boxes are can have a particular heritage value, which is far less the case with those digital Betacams. And we just want to prevent people from sticking barcodes on those cardboard boxes. So we just provided them with temporary little ropes just to apply them to the wax cylinder boxes. And they're not gluing anything on the wax cylinder itself, of course. Then again, the ingest process when it comes to sustainable archiving, again, is quite the same as with the digital Betacams. It comes to providing a way of sustainably storing, of measuring quality, of reporting, of providing transparency towards the content providers. And this slide, this is about the giving access, and actually there is not so much to show here, because this slide is actually not ours. I can't show you much about how we provide access to these wax cylinders, because we'd like to start off with that next year. From 2016 on, we would like to provide scientific researchers with a platform such as the teachers platform, the educational platform. But this is one of the best-in-class examples, we believe, that's from the Netherlands Institute of Sound and Vision, called AV Researcher, and this graph here is just about the occurrence of terms in the television news. So I would like to conclude with 5 core values that we really like to stick to when we work, and we really like to keep that in mind, just to raise the bar of quality. We are a networked service organization. We're not doing this for ourselves. We're doing this for the audiovisual heritage sector and for the public, because the heritage is not ours, it's of the public in general. We consider preservation, storage, and access not as something you just do and then put aside. These are active processes. You have to keep them. You have to keep on monitoring them. Then we'd like to encourage use, just to increase digital competencies, but also to keep on making the mark of audiovisual heritage, to convince people of what the value is, because heritage is only has only a legitimacy when it's alive. If you can't reuse it, up to a certain extent, of course, there is IP rights, for example. If you can't use it, it dies. That's what we are convinced of. Then we try to be measurably operationally excellent. That's not an easy task, and we keep on striving for that, and we are well aware that on some points we make mistakes, but we try to constantly strive for the best. Then I already stressed it, there's transparency and sustainability, of course. What are we doing this for if it's not all sustainable? And last but not least, we're demand driven. We're not just putting something online because we have it on our vaults. We're putting things online because there is some kind of demand, and we're even actively searching for demand, I would say. On the other hand, we also want to be innovation-driven. It's up to us to show people around what's always possible with this kind of heritage. Also, when it comes to, for example, new cataloging technologies. Federica has asked me before I made this presentation just to also put in some thoughts about authenticity or reliability, whatever perspective you would like to take. And I would like to ask briefly, before I conclude, are there any people, trained historians in this room? Please raise your hand. People who studied history? Okay. Because I've heard some things here, and I'd like, this is going to sound provocative, but maybe that enhances the debates later on also. It's my belief that authenticity is an unreachable goal. That means that you should strive for it, but you'll never really get there. Absolute authenticity does not exist, only because at the very first moment when a documentary source is created, from the very first moment it starts degrading, and it starts also losing information. It sounds like theory, and it is theory, but we should keep that in mind. Absolute authenticity does not exist, and in preserving the historical remainder, that's what I call it, we should strive to keep it as it is, but in a way it's an impossible task. Second one, authenticity is only one aspect of historical source criticism. Completeness is equally important. Why do I stress this? Because I have heard people holding a plea, and I appreciate it, really, but holding a plea for authenticity, and I agree with that. But you have to think also in a world of limited resources. Let me tell you one brief anecdote. We had an archivist at VRT, at the public broadcaster, who worked from the mid-70s until the early 90s. The guy was very much interested in World War II recordings, a very important collection at VRT, but he focused so much on that there is almost no recordings at the VRT archives from the 70s and the 80s in the radio archives, which is really a pity, because the World War II recordings are well preserved. He copied them from lacquer discs onto tapes and carefully documented them, and I appreciated him for that. But if only he wouldn't have focused his attention so much onto one source, then maybe the archive could have been a little more complete, and we could have known about what actually was broadcasted in the 80s and how it sounded like. So completeness, or at least quantity, I would call it, is also a thing that we should think about, and resources are limited. Then one very, very important thing that every historian will know, and I'm sorry to say this, but there have been a few errors or mistakes about this. Historical documents are what I call remainder of history. And remainder of history is transformed into sources by historians when they ask their questions. This is a quote by the Ghent professor Walter Prévenir. And it's very, very, very important to me. What is a historical source depends on the question you ask to the material. If you are interested in the smell, the scent of a tape, for example, for one reason or another, that is not preserved by digitization, just to mention one thing. Therefore, history is constantly rewritten. I've heard Bill saying, yeah, it's not up to us to rewrite history. I beg to differ. History itself is constantly rewritten. It does not exist in itself. What exists is the remainder. And I agree with you that what we shouldn't do is deliberately alter the remainder. That is, so far, it's true. But history itself is open for ever new interpretations. And then I'd like to add this one. just think about Caesar's manuscript of De Bello Gallico, just to mention one Italian source that also has to do with Belgium. We are studying a copy of 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 De Bello Gallico, and still we are studying it, and historians take care of that by asking the right questions and by applying historical source criticism. That's what they do. There is a historical method for that, because the original is not anymore there. Why is it not anymore there? Because it's already started degrading from the first day that Caesar's secretaries wrote the book. And at some point we have to realize that degradation and therefore altering the remainder is inevitable. Also, as I said, with audiovisual sources. But there is one thing that we can do, and that is document things. Document how we change things, also when it's inevitably. We should try to avoid it, but at some point there is no other solution, I'm afraid. So these are my final thoughts, and I hope they can be thought-provoking and food for thought during the discussion. I thank you very much.